Hello and welcome back to Political Science 101, and we are on Chapter 6 on interest groups. And right now we're talking about how interest groups differ from political parties. And we listed those things. Interest groups are policy specialists, and political parties are party generalists. Interest groups are usually more tightly organized than political parties, and a political party's main sphere of influence is the electoral system. Interest groups may try to influence the outcome of the election. So you have a sphere of influence, and we will talk later on about spheres of influence. And that kind of goes back to Victorian era, when the Industrial Revolution came along and men were needed, or men were wanted as the gender to work in industry. And then you had these societal spheres that were constructed. They were not real. They were not, society sets up different boundaries that aren't really there. But oftentimes in the minds of the people in society, they think they are there. So then you had the public sphere and the private sphere being the home, which the woman was allotted to and was not supposed to get out of for most any reason. The only portion of public sphere that she might be allowed to move out of would have been that of a religious or church organization, and only within the other women's community. And then you have the public sphere, which both men could move in and out of the public sphere and the private sphere, but women were not allowed allowed to be involved in society's ideologies. Women were not supposed to be involved in politics or economics, or working outside the home and that sort of things. And as you see different changes, some people say modernization, although modernization doesn't always mean progress. Many of my history professors would use the word progress, which means, better for everyone, democratization, where it's an equaling out. So you have this sphere of influence. So you might hear spheres often. So I'm just explaining it to you where it came from, the public and private sphere. You can have a political sphere, etc. There's different types of interest groups. I got on and looked up some different interest group websites. I think I'll put that on your module so that you can look as well. And, just being kind of surprised at which ones I was a part of maybe previously, a few, and which ones I'm a part of now. I'm a member of the American Historical Society. I was once a member of the NEA, which is the National Educators Association. And in Ohio, which is kind of interesting, when I taught in the public school, you were kind of forced to be in it. And I wasn't always really sure that I agreed with a lot of the things, although I think labor unions definitely have a great place in our history. They really kept from a lot of abuse, but sometimes there's like reverse abuse. And I've witnessed that in different areas, in different school settings. But I also taught in Kentucky, where I was not forced to join. And that it was an option, and they were not as active. So just different takes on that. So I was once a member of that. I'm a member of the American Historical Association, because I am an instructor in the higher education level, in the college level. Okay, so I would really encourage you to find out what interest groups you're a part of, or you didn't know you were a part of, by just kind of perusing those and looking through those. Some interest groups support both parties, all right, and they try, especially in the area of information technology, which that's really interesting, I think. They contribute often to both party campaigns in order to not have a punishment or to avoid a political disfavor. But you know what? Is that a bribe? is that necessary? Can they pick one if they wish? That's just kind of interesting to look at. Labor and professional interest groups, union goals. You have unions, the decline of unions in the workforce, which it was really kind of surprising. Now, unions were extremely effective in protecting workers at a time where they were abused highly in the early 1900s. And, just an example, today, just as a teaching assistant at the University of Cincinnati, the different grad school, whether you're a chemistry grad student or a history grad student, they made extreme differences in amount of pay. Like, I want to say like by $10,000 or $5,000 to $7,000. And I know that the teaching assistants wanted to unionize in order to, kind of take care of that, and they were not permitted to. So there still are abuses. There still are areas where labor unions are needed, and then there also are where they got too powerful. So it almost seems like it needs to be a balance. Labor unions definitely did amazing things, getting rid of child labor, making sure that you only had a certain amount of a work week, which really was based on scientific evidence and, the study of how much work can someone do before they're no longer producing more, or it kind of begins to reverse itself. And I read a wonderful book on labor in grad school that talked about there was a certain point in time in the 1800s where they believed that fatigue was a disease, and they were trying to cure it so that the worker could work more and more and more. And they found that, that 8-hour workday is no accident. They really can only work so many hours before they are no longer profiting or working to their full ability. That was really interesting. I don't know how often you read stories on LinkedIn or different professional articles, but I've read several that talk about working for 50 minutes, taking a break, 5 or 10 minute break, working diligently for 50 minutes, taking a break. I know in grad school I really tried to implement that because it's so exhausting. And something I was really kind of surprised when I looked at the book that we read in grad school about labor was mental work is more tiring than actual physical work. And that, I guess that surprised me. But after going through grad school, I would definitely agree with it. Not that it's not rewarding. Okay, the differing state laws, talks about why the decline of the labor unions. There's more labor unions in the North than the South. It's very lax in the South. And it also talks about economic conservatives are traditionally hostile to labor unions, often because they want to make as much money as they possibly can. And when you put a labor union in there, it does mess that up because they're fighting for some different rights. Okay. So you see the figures and the differing state laws, public sector unions, professional interest groups. You have American Medical Association, like I said, the NEA, the AHA, American Historical Association. Consumer interest groups, identity interest groups, which is really kind of awkward that they put in there, but it's very true. On the bottom of page 132, slaves, of course, were not able to form interest groups. And I also wonder, I need to do some more research on labor unions in the North, but one really interesting thing about labor unions in the North is, there was cheap labor in the North before the Civil War. They were immigrants and they were treated extremely poorly. So those labor unions came in and kind of cut down their work weeks and raised their pay so that they could at least live. So I wonder if that got kind of a snowball effect and got those labor unions started in the North earlier, because in the South you had free labor because it was in the form of slavery. So, wondering the effects of, of that, because it was free labor. And then even after the Civil War, once you had the Northern troops removed, slavery just went by a different name. Intimidation, just throwing away African American ballots, threatening them not to vote. I mean, there's just a list of things. As a historian, I had no idea until I read firsthand accounts and that sort of thing. So I wonder if that happened. And this week we're going to highlight the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, was founded in 1909. And that is an interest group, and it's so interesting how it started. In fact, just fascinating how it started, because it really started with a feud between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And he is one of my favorite writers, incredible man. Booker T. Washington was also an incredible man, but they had very different views on how to gain the rights of African Americans. And it really is, it's kind of shocking. And when you hear the story, I've had people around me in the past really talk about the NAACP in pretty much a negative manner. And until I read the origins of it, I was absolutely amazed. Knowledge is power. And when you research and you get to the bottom of different things and you see where they come from, it is amazing that your perspective and your point of view can really change. But that's really what historians do. It is to be more objective, to look at something, go back to the beginning and research. And that's why we read primary sources, because primary sources are firsthand accounts, not someone's interpretation of something, which would be a secondary source. Okay, ideological interest groups. You have the Tea Party movement, which has been really popular. You have the environmental groups, religious groups. And this is really interesting because my son is a political science and a history major together. I know how did I pull that together? So we have some really interesting conversations, and we really began talking about, there are a lot of religious groups that stand in the pulpit and tell you who to vote for. And honestly, that is not what they're supposed to do. Religious groups are supposed to give you the basis and, the foundation of what your religion believes. And then, whether it's, pray about your choice or, research your choice or make an educated decision. But just in the past, I have been a part of different church organizations that acted more like, instead of a religion or a church, they acted much more like an interest group, where they actually named it, okay, who you should vote for. And I'm not saying that you, having someone come and speak on certain subjects that are political isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I just think you got to be so careful, because for me, it slipped in under the radar.